everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today I'm so happy to have with me Kristin Kolterman. Kristin is a spiritual solutionist who helps coaches create and run profitable sacred healing programs and is basically your BFF COO. And she's also the program coordinator for Andee Love Inc, working closely to dream, design, create, and implement Andee's programs, as well as it being the magnetic support team behind the Soul Flow Embodiment Facilitator program, which is how we really connected. So there's so much richness to what you do, Kristin, and I am so excited to be able to finally get to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you for having me. It is such an honor. I'm so grateful for you for asking. This is a new endeavor, having these open conversations, and so I'm excited to get into it today.
Yay. Because what I've witnessed in you is really like these conversations generally are all around communication, leadership in some way or another, right? And what I've witnessed in you really is epic leadership comes to mind. Like that was just the word that landed, because you, like, I've been in that Soul Flow Embodiment Facilitator program. Yeah, I've been I'm like all the words, but like I've been in that program and I've been supported by you holding that space and, you know, being there to ask, like, answer the questions and all of the things. And I know that we have like a whole journey for the next year together with the We Will Rise, and a lot of what you do is, yeah, epic leadership is what comes about. Like you're holding this space and you are leading the way by showing the way. So that actually makes me want to ask, that first question is like, how do you define leadership and what words do you attribute to leadership?
Oh, well, making me like cry off the bat. Thank you for that. That's very kind. Epic leadership. You know, I've been in this like personal development world for many, many, many years. I've been on the personal development journey for many years, and I've been in witness to many different examples of leadership. Some not so great, some okay, some really extraordinary. And I think that the thing that really stands out for me is the ones that have been really just incredibly amazing and impactful are those that have been the examples of their own work, their own practice, while they're in these like leadership spaces. Like there's no sense of hierarchy or further ahead or you know, they're just like they're in their stuff too, and showing up in that way and in that capacity have been, and that's kind of just what I equate to being like a really strong leader, that you can hold both. You can hold, you know, your own process, your own stories, your own beliefs, your own blocks, your own everything, while also holding and believing so deeply in like your mission, your impact, and the thing that you want to create in service of others. So it's kind of this I don't know, this dual box of just humanness, of someone stepping in and saying, I'm not perfect, I have my things, but also I have this deep desire to serve and serve in a big way.
Yeah, that actually really paints the picture well of how I see leadership as well. It's the leading by example, but it's also, I like how you said the humanness of it as well, and how traditional, I'll use the word traditional because it's the only word that's coming to mind for it, but like traditional leadership that we see in corporations and even in politics, or in, you know, like in the more, I guess, masculine driven society elements that show up. Being yourself has always been viewed as or being human or having flaws or owning your flaws even has always been viewed as a fault or as a weakness. Have you witnessed not necessarily, well, maybe people, but like scenarios where that has been the leadership style and it's kind of fallen flat, or if it's succeeded really well? What have you
Oh,
witnessed in
for
that area?
sure. Oh my gosh,
Mm.
for sure. I think I've been in many different leadership scenarios where I've been led and I've had to be the leader. And I think that what when I kind of look back on, my journey or the path that I've taken, um, I can just think of so many examples of just believing and saying to myself, the success or perceived success of something, whether that's like a business or a personal journey or what have you, is really, and you're working with others, it's kind of at the pace of the leader, and I think when people step into roles when they're having to either manage others or they're having to lead a course or they're having to do X, Y, and Z, it's almost like you step into this, in my belief, like this sacred responsibility of showing up and doing the work and really like walking your walk and teaching what you believe in. And then I think when you're not in that, which, is just integrity in general, it's kind of when, the needle doesn't move forward, or it moves forward because you've willed it to move forward, but it doesn't necessarily move forward in the best, greatest good for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's almost like there's not this richness of how it can move forward in that instance, because it's not full. It's not a full experience of this person's experience, because they're kind of cutting off a whole element of themselves in order to be perceived in a certain way also.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's where people get caught, that they're trying to, I don't know, show up in a certain type of way to like prove something. But in reality, we kind of all have to be rowing in the same direction. And, it's kind of like the pace of the project is this pace of the leader, the speed of the pack. You're only as good as, your not weakest link, but I think you're, the slowest embodiment of whatever it is that you're creating.
Yeah, definitely. So you have a really varied background that I love reading about. I love hearing about. It is one of my favorite backgrounds to be like, okay, tell me more. So just
this might require a second podcast.
Just because like I can see that there is clearly a journey being taken as well. Like that's what I like about it. I can see that you have forged your own path, as like you've started by just forging your own path, but you've also, there's a fearlessness, and I'll share the list of the things that I've been given about what you've done, but like it shows to me a fearlessness in making decisions that shift things and alter like the course of things, and I want to hear about that process, because I want to know if there was, how much trust was involved, or how much it was like well, I just have to, or all of the things. So you went to the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, and you have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Accessory Design, where your specialty was shoemaking. So you became a shoe cobbler, which is one of my favorite facts of the week. And and in there, you also went on to do your 200-hour yoga teaching certification. Is it Pranakriya? That's what I'm.
Pranakriya.
Yeah. So, and then now you do what you do now.
Yes.
Which is like basically COO kind of roles, right? And support roles. So what are the highlights there? I'm like,
where do we start? Well, I can tell you, I was a girl, and I still am a woman who I think just rolls to the beat of her own song and drum and all the things. I just remember just being a kid and just feeling so different. Like I was such a nerd art school girl. And when I applied for college, I applied to one college, which was SCAD. I got in, I think, by like the skin of my teeth. And I knew pretty quickly that fashion was my like go-to, was the thing that I really wanted to do. I'm sure if we were to find, a high school friend or two, they would not have been surprised. I was always like making my own things, super creative. And I don't know, I just always had this like quiet tenacity of like doing and wanting to do what I've wanted to do. And I think I measure that with just my Italian upbringing and this like go to wanting to create something kind of energy. When I was in SCAD, which you'll love this, I got all the way up to my senior collection, which is like a huge deal in the school. And my dad was in a really horrific car accident, and it kind of halted and stopped. And that's kind of one of the first instances where like spirit really like took over, and started showing like different avenues in different ways. And so I had to like kind of stop school, get it, really like buckle down on work to like afford to pay for everything and live and school and the whole nine. Which was, the accident necessarily wasn't the blessing in disguise, but my timing was, because I got all the way to my senior collection and I had a major anxiety attack. It was like hit in the face, like gut reaction of like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend all of this money to produce this collection. And it just wasn't in me. It just was like, it's interesting. I'm even saying this, like, it was the first ping of me being like, of my intuition stepping in and saying like, wait a second, here, there's a different way, there's a different path. And so, but I really loved shoemaking and accessories. And at the time, I had it as a minor in my program. And that year that I was supposed to be technically a senior, I had to extend my classes, obviously, because I was working full time and having to cut everything back. And that September, which technically was my 5th year, I had a few more classes to cover to complete my course and program. And they had opened accessory design as a major. So I negotiated my way into all of my foundational classes and like all of the things to like,
I can't imagine you negotiating at all.
Beg them to allow me to be a student to graduate with my major in accessory design. And they did. And so that whole year I was able to make an entire collection. I made shoes, handbags, belts, small leather goods. And I was just like, this is the thing. I've always loved like crafting things and really getting into the nitty gritty of them. And so with that kind of in mind, I graduated and then moved to New York City, and I was working for a small independent handbag designer in the city, which was amazing. But I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't really the space and place for me, and that there was something else that I wanted to be doing, which was this like yoga piece. And I was like, how in the world am I going to combine like this with fashion and accessories and like living in New York City?
Yeah. You're like,
this just sounds crazy. So I ended up moving up I left New York and I moved to Maine. And I found this little yoga studio that I loved. I got certified. And then in the same building, it was this old fabric milled building in Maine. And they had like different shops in like what used to be like the old spaces. And the yoga studio was upstairs. And then a floor or two down was this old school shoe cobbler shop. It was like it was ginormous. It was like 2,500 square feet, like all the old machines, the smells, the glues, the leathers, like the whole 9 yards. And this woman and her family owned it, and they were looking for somebody. And I was like, hi, I'm here. And so I ended up like getting the job, and every day I would go into work and I would sew things, stitch things apart, resole old work boots, repair handles on leather bags. It was like a dream. And then I would go upstairs and I would teach yoga. And I was like, this is bizarre and amazing, but here we are. And I'm loving it and so thankful. And that also was kind of my first taste in like small business and running, how to run kind of the behind the scenes of both businesses.
Where in Maine was that?
It was in Brunswick.
Oh,
Brunswick, Maine. And so
oh, sorry. I was just
yeah.
like, you show up and it's like, oh, I think I need to follow this yoga thing. So you just
Yes.
like, you move to Maine and then you show up, you're like, here's a yoga studio. And also here's like one of my other current passions.
Yes. I
And
don't know
it's
how, and it wasn't easy by any means. I mean, I was definitely young and in my 20s and trying to figure it out. And you know, it's just a fond time in my life where I'm like, oh wow, like I did that, and it's a very lost art nowadays. And I think in turn why, you know, that particular business didn't really succeed so much, like moving forward just with technologies and the way things are made now these days. But it was definitely like a time capsule for sure.
yeah, that's amazing. So how long were you there? What happened then?
I lived there for about 4 years. And then in 2014, my mom, she had a brain aneurysm. And as you can imagine, like that completely flipped life upside down. And I think again, it was like one of those like big, like when I look back, it's like one of those milestone moments where you're just like, okay, like here's another pivot point of decision and of like really calling in like a higher power, the universe, God, like whatever you want to call it, to support you in a certain capacity. And we came out of that experience with just a completely different perspective on life and needing to, I don't know, change things up and kind of really one of those fork in the road moments of like, am I going to continue on doing what I'm doing, or are we about to pivot? And it was we're pivoting. And so I ended up moving back to Florida, which is where I live now, to be closer to my parents, who were just having, you know, health issues, and kind of having to like start all over again, which was very, very challenging, but looking back, like the best decision for sure at the time.
Yeah. As someone, and I ask this because I can relate in a way to the anxiety, as someone who, you know, has had anxiety attacks before, and like, so obviously you experienced that. What was your initial relationship with life changes as they show up? Because like in reflection, it's like, it almost sounds like, you know, you're like, yeah, cool, okay, I guess I'm doing this now, and it sounds like it's a smoother road. But how did your relationship with that shift and change over all of these different things that kept throwing themselves at you?
Yeah, I mean, I was a very, very anxious child. Like school was very, very challenging for me. I think it was part just anxious, high energy, feeling like I've always had to like overcompensate for certain things. And I think also too, probably a level of perfectionism, wanting to make sure everything's, you know, as it
I get it.
needed to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And I mean, though during those years, it was definitely not smooth. And I think I mean, I for sure did not have the tools that I have now to combat that anxiety. And I think it was more of like a pushing through, and then also definitely being carried by something bigger than me. that I didn't really have the language or wherewithal to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it, because they're quite big moves, all of them, like going
Yes.
from Savannah to New York, New York to Maine, like all very different states, and then back to Florida, like super different, like super different states and super different dynamics and almost cultures within each of those states too. Yeah.
And I mean, now that I could probably articulate it, I was definitely being pulled by a vision or this thing that I didn't really know how to like put into words. But I can remember certain moments of like not even knowing like how things were happening, or like, you know, even processing after that. Like, even when you say that, I'm like, yeah, like those were some pretty big jumps. And yet I still did them, because I think somewhere inside of me was just this major tug, which was for sure like the vision, the dream, this thing that was out here that I wanted to create and show up in my life as.
Yeah, it's almost like a knowing, and you were tapped into that knowing just enough, which is what, like going back to what we were saying, leadership is like being aware of your own humanness, being aware of like stuff that's going on within you, really. But it sounded like you were tapped into that knowing just enough to trust it, even if it felt big. Like it might have still felt big and scary, or, you know, like whatever it was. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So you moved back to Florida, and then what happened with work then at that point?
So at that point, I was able to secure a job with a shoe company. They were a budding retail company. They had a couple of stores, mostly in the South, and they made their shoes. They had a really fun, bright, like funky style to them. And I just went in and I was like, I'm gonna be a part of this retail team, and start to explore different skill sets I hadn't yet acquired up until that point. And that was in like my late 20s that kind of all went down. And I was there for about 5.5 years, and really that's where I attune a lot of this like knowledge that I have now of being in this like culture, and in leadership space, and learning to communicate with people, and learning to really dive into many facets of what small business looks like, what people need, the different areas and avenues you can explore when you're in the process of building something. And also this like drive, this like, not necessarily I mean, at the time it was definitely a lot of hustle, but this building phase. And they were about 10 years into their entrepreneurial journey by the time I came around. And it was like, these were the moments of like them really in expansion. And I got thrown in to the
you got like first row seats.
Yeah, I got front row seat pretty quick, and pretty fast too. And I think then at the time it was this combination of like really practical work, and also very like spiritual work and personal development work, and this combination of the two, just like I had with like, you know, yoga teaching and training, and then being a shoe cobbler was like kind of that same dynamic of, you know, I'm going to go and have this really practical work of being like in a retail store and all of that, and communicating with people and selling product, and, you know, going through the buildings of what that means. And then also like personal development over here of really like opening up Pandora's box of who you are and what you're about, and again like casting a light to that vision.
Yeah, I like that, because it kind of paints that, like it gives that visual as well of like casting the light to the vision. It's because I feel like sometimes I feel like our visions are always there. We just haven't come across them yet. And like, or we haven't had the catalyst that brings us to that yet. And that's not by our own fault at all necessarily. It's just like well, you're not at that bend yet. You're not there yet.
Yeah.
But like when you get there, it's like, oh, it's almost as if, for me, the feeling is it's almost as if, oh, this has always been there.
Yes.
It's this familiarity, right? So
yes.
So with your work that you do now, at what point did you cast that light on that vision?
I mean, I think it's always, like you're saying, it's always been there. It's always been in the field to grab. But it's interesting because I sit back and I look and I'm seeing what I'm doing now, and it's so much better than I think I ever really anticipated.
Yeah.
And it comes really organically. Like I said, like I learned a lot of my, this, like I had built a relationship with my past, company of just like constantly being in ideas mode and like having this like fearlessness to just like say like, this is the idea, like we can run with it or don't. And I think that is been my biggest lesson of like learning to really like tap in and listen to like the nudges or the things that are saying like, bring this up, bring this to the forefront, because it can start to create momentum or change things in a different direction. And so I think, when I started really like thinking about like what's next, what's the vision, like, you know, the call, if you will, was getting louder. I was in a stage where I think things around me were going really well. I was like flying up the ranks of this company. I was making the most money I had ever made. To the outside world, it looked like I was doing it, and I was, but internally,
like the dream, right? You know,
yeah,
like, yeah,
for sure. But internally, I was getting pieces of of what my actual vision was, but it wasn't like quite right. I was still traveling, which I've always wanted to do. I traveled so much in the last 2 years of that company that I was like, okay, got the travel, like check. But there was still this like pull, like something else, something bigger. And at the time, I ended up hiring Andee Love, who we both know and love dearly, as like my first one-on-one mentor and coach. And I've never worked with anybody in that capacity, like ever.
And
before.
what a way to like dive into it also.
Right?
Just
I didn't
like
even really know like
herself,
what,
and then like one-on-one.
Yeah, I didn't even really know what it even meant or like what it was, the process. But I filled out this application of hers super late, like I remember the night so vividly. It was right around like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was filling out this one-on-one application, and I look back, we like actually talk and we don't laugh about it, but we sort of like reminisce of like this person that was just so wanting to be supportive of people and the businesses and have like this impact and have this ripple effect of a mission that was like bigger than like what, you know, on the surface was going on. And it took us a really long time to work together. It was like 8 or 9 months. She just kept following up with me. She just kept checking in. I was like, who is this woman? Like, I mean, she was so kind and like definitely not pushy, definitely not like money hungry whatsoever, but she just kept like winking at me. And so finally, you know, I leaned into the fear and the scarcity and like the lack and all of those things. And we started working one-on-one. And the time that, I mean, I'm pretty sure at the time we could go back and look at our sessions. And I was saying to her things like, I just want to work with women. I really want to start building something that like means something, that that is really like impacting people. And I always feel like I'm witnessing all of these like coaches or people in leadership around me, but like I don't necessarily know if I feel like that. Like, I'm not going to show up as like the coach or like the whatever. But I have this dream of like supporting the containers of them, but I don't know how that kind of all goes into play. And we kind of like worked through some stuff during that time. And we did various things. And then it was like sort of tick marks started happening.
Yeah,
And I
I'm laughing
remember,
because I know where you're at now.
yes. And I ended up going to her house for a VIP weekend. And that I think was one of the weekends that kind of really opened the floodgates of possibility, because here I saw somebody who was so dedicated to their work and service, like in their practice. Like, you can tell, like, when people, even in the online space, like, are they really doing their work? Are they really, in, like, are they their first client? Are they taking themselves through their processes, as opposed to shouting like 10K months, 100K months, whatever. And here it was, I was in witness of this woman, like, really in her practice. And I ended up staying at her house. And it was like this, huge moment for me of like possibility of like, here is somebody who's so rooted, so dedicated to their practice, and they are showing up and they are creating impact and they're contributing to the world without shouting it from the rooftops for some kind of vanity metric. And I was like, oh, okay, like, this is interesting. And so then I just continued to stay like in her world, and our circles became really like intertwined in the communities we were in, and in this like spiritual entrepreneurship. And then right after that happened, funny enough, she ended up asking her community for applications for her retreat manager, and I applied because it was like my dream job. I was like, I want to go. I want to travel and plan experiences, and I had had a few instances in my life where it was sort of a career not taken. Like, I loved creating experiences for people to come in and do whatever we were doing. Like, it brought me so much joy that I was like, this is the thing. Like, if I could plan the details, and like, I would get really involved, and it was like Pinterest crazy. And then I would like, the event would happen, or I would execute the thing, and I would have there would be such a heart-filled joy in watching people like in the thing that I dreamed up having come into creation. And so I was like, I can totally do that. Like, I mean, I've done some wild, crazy, creative things before. So I applied and I interviewed, and I was in the top 3, and she went with somebody else. And I was like devastated, obviously, but she wrote me back and she was like, listen, I want to put this here, but let's not like, put
Close
this
the
aside.
door.
Put this aside just yet. I feel like there's something else here. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, we'll stay connected. And then she launched her 4th cohort of the mastermind, and I knew that was it. I needed to be a part of it. I remember having like just the deposit. I was like texting my partner, like, listen, I'm doing this, like, I'll figure it out. And he was like, yeah, go for it. Like, whatever you need to do. And I ended up signing up, and then we started a month or 2 later with the women in cohort 4. And it was just this now another layer of this whole journey. And during that time, I ended up negotiating to transition out of my job, doing the same work I was doing, which was like basically opening up stores and doing a lot of the operational elements, hiring people and like training and like all of that, but just on like a different timeline and more on a freelance basis. And so that all happened by like November 2019. And then December was the first month I was like solo, like had incorporated my business, like had really been like, okay, we're doing this. And then obviously like 3 months later, like the pandemic happened. And I think then it was at a time where my worst fear had been actualized, because I was like very much grew up in like this like linear mindset of lifestyle. Like you go to college, you do the thing, you find the husband, you get married, you buy the house, you have the kids, whatever, you know, you retire, you know, whatever. But I never subscribed to it. Like I remember being a kid being like, I don't know about this. This seems like not accurate. And so I just went to the beat of my own drum. And now at this point, I was like, okay, but I'm changing the course again, starting this business. I have no idea what I'm doing. And my biggest fear is like, I'm not going to have any income. Like, how am I going to support myself doing this like heart-centered work? And then boom, pandemic happens. I lost all of my income. My worst fear came to reality, and I had to now really sit with it. And I mean, I tell you what, like March and April of last year was like, okay, like how bad do I want to connect? Like, how much do I actually believe? And how much can I actually lean even more into the processes and practices that I so deeply love and that I've been doing for, you know, the last 10 years. Like, here it is. Like, this is the moment if you're going to call in like spiritual support.
This is the embodied leadership part. Like, it's
100%.
Yeah.
And in that, I remember I just so deeply wanted to serve. You know, I think most of us in these leadership spaces probably did. We're like, well, what do we do with this global crisis going on? Like, how do we
what do we do?
Like there's no, like, what do we do? And so I reached out to Andee, and I was still technically a client, and I said, listen, like, I really want to support, and I just feel like you need help in some capacity, and like, please let me serve you. Like, are there worksheets you need? Are there manuals you need? Are there I don't know, whatever, like, can I help? And she brought me back, and she was like, actually, yeah, I do need help. And at the time, the facilitator program had already launched its first cohort, and that cohort ended up being totally flipped upside down, because it was supposed to be like an in-person event, 4 days at Kripalu, but like everything had shut down, and like she was like freaking out because she had completely took her entire business offline and was doing in-person events in 2020, and like that went out the window. And so she was like, yeah, I have this 10-page document that I need to make into a manual, and this is not my zone of genius. And I was like, well, actually, I really like doing these things. And she was like, all right, let's do it, with like no expectation, no exchange, just like, let me serve you and the community. And what happened a month later, we ended up creating a 140-page manual, which is the first edition of the facilitator manual. And every day it was like I had her in my ear, transcribing and trainings and going through past workshops and all sorts of things. And I was just like, I am so lit up. Like, I am making no money, and I am so lit. I don't know what is going to happen, but I don't know. Something's happening here. And I just kept hearing like, stay the course, stay the course, stay the course, stay the course. And then after that was that project kind of wrapped up, we were like, okay, what's next? And I mean, listen, I'm like a little pushy. Like, maybe not pushy is the great word, but I was very much like, I know, like
direct. And it's the Italian in you, isn't it? It's like this,
for
right?
Sure. Yeah. I was like, I want to do that every day of my life for the rest of my life. It's to be in these experiences. And I ended up joining cohort 1's 2-day like immersion. And I was like supporting in there as like, I mean, at the time I didn't know, but I was definitely like energetic support, like cheerleading, like feeling really connected to the women and the community there. And then it was just like the floodgates opened, and I was like, I have so many ideas. Like, here are all of my ideas. Like, not to like freak you out or be bombarded, but like, I just have so many ideas for this. And so she was like, her and RJ kind of took it all in, and like, you know, we were trying to navigate too, like being having this client working relationship, which we definitely would not suggest to anybody. But I think the lines were so clear, and her as like a leader and a businesswoman knew what was going on. And I also, as like a leader, roles were, even though they maybe weren't super defined. And then September came, still in the cohort, the longest cohort that will ever live. We hadn't even had our first retreat yet. It had been a whole year we had been in the program, and it's a year-long program. We haven't had our retreats yet, which is like the one thing that I was like, this is what I want to do. And she was like, listen, come out to Sedona a little early and help with the other cohort, which was cohort 5 that she was running simultaneously. And then I'm telling you, like, God stepped in or something and gave me the interview and promotion from craziness. We had our setup day, and she ended up having like a heat stroke or dehydration or something. And she was knocked out for 3 hours. We had all these crazy protocols, and she just sat on the couch, like self-regulating. And I ran around and I was setting things up and thriving. And it was one of those moments where we like laugh about it, because it was so in alignment with business, life, love, support, like all of these things. And we ended up creating this really beautiful space and event. And I was like, this is it. This is what we're doing together. And so we've been evolving this space and role over the last 9-ish months. And now it's, we've developed such a relationship out of these retreat experiences and out of, combining these leadership spaces. And she's like allowed me this space and this creative freedom to really kind of step in and lean in to the community and to the support. And I mean, the facilitator program was a big catalyst for that.
Yeah, it's amazing because, like, from my perspective of you, because I really only came into like the sphere of Andee's world and work September-ish itself. Like, it was around September anyway for me. And to me, it feels like you have been doing this for years. Like, it still blows my mind to hear like what that was only like really clarified last year. What? Like, no, because it feels like this is what you've been doing for years. And because it feels so right, even from like the outside, there's this view of, wow, she's really living what she loves, and she's really living in her purpose, and she's really like just thrive. Like, the thriving word is correct, like 100% is correct. Like, oh wow, so she must have been doing this for ages. But I think it's a really nice lesson and reminder for people that you can land in something and it can feel so right that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it.
Yeah. And I think that's the lesson too that we've both come to realize, because in my mind, I mean, the minute I sort of stepped into her world, like, to me, I feel like I've been like manifesting or calling this in, like it's been in the field, right? Because we look back on those calls, or I look back on those first documents she had me, where I was really starting to like cast the vision for myself. And like, she is my ideal client, essentially, we didn't know it, but like now we like joke about it, because that's really what we didn't know on either side. But I have this like deep, it's like, I can't even really describe it, but just this deep need and love of like leaning into like this community of women. The women that she calls in are just, they fill me up and inspire me so much. And it's a different way of leadership. It's a different way of people showing up that I haven't really seen. And I think because I've been a student of the work, and I've also had my own experiences in the containers, that, yes, I could have been her retreat manager back in 2018, but like now I feel like I have this whole new understanding and perspective of what the students, the facilitators, the clients go through their process. And I mean, it's constantly a work. I'm constantly working on it, but I have found that the more I'm leaning in, I've had like the nudge of like, oh, this is the thing. And I just keep leaning into it and keep trying to figure it out. And it's still like, we still haven't even, I think, totally nailed down the like job itself or the role itself, because it's so much bigger, I think, because we both have such a passion for it.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the journey of the evolution of ourselves in our lives. Like, it's never going to be like, oh, okay, that's it, done. This is what I do.
Oh,
like, it's like,
no,
oh, what's the next layer? What's the next layer? What's the next layer? Like, what's the next evolution or iteration of it? One last question potentially that I just want to go back to, though, because when at the beginning of the pandemic, you were saying, like, you know, you mentioned something about like when your worst fears happen. So what in hindsight, because we love hindsight, but like what happens when the thing you fear most ends up happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I feared the most was so superficial and was this like false safety net. Because it was really challenging for me to believe that I could be supported financially or otherwise by doing like this kind of work, which is, you know, essentially taking women through a journey and a process of their own like healing. I was seeing it, I had examples of it, but I had such a block of where I fit in the whole puzzle of it all, because I didn't see myself as a certain, like, as, say, quote unquote, the coach getting people on. And I knew that in my like, you know, quirkiness, in my different field, I had such a vision. All I kept always hearing was like support and serve, support and serve, support and serve. And I think I needed that to happen for me to say like, well, okay, how much do you really support and serve? How much do you really, again, walk your walk and talk your talk? And I think that losing, what my fear was having no income coming in. But the reality is that I was abundant in other areas. And I had, you know, a partner who ended up becoming an essential worker in the community. And so his income didn't really stop or change. So it wasn't like nothing was coming in. It was like my perception of how it was coming in changed. And then crazy things started happening, you know, and I was able to get support in other ways that allowed me to continue moving forward, but also allowed me to create this space to lean into those practices and then wholeheartedly say, you know, I want to serve you without any expectation or strings or ties or anything like that.
It's this showing up fully. You're like, no, I'm doing this. Let me it was this stepping like completely in and going, it doesn't matter. Like, this is what I'm doing. Like, and there was no other, it's almost like you said, like, there's no other choice. This is what I'm doing. Like, you can let me or not, but I'm going to do it.
I mean, I was not going back. I wasn't going backwards. Like, there was no backwards. So it was either this or something else. And, you know, I feel like for many years, like I've been this, like, I think I even wrote in my thing to you, like this queen of in between. Like, I don't ever really think, I mean, now I definitely believe this, but I don't really ever think that you truly like arrive to the place you're trying to go. It's like, once you get there, there's always a new expansion
Oh my
space.
God, yes.
And so,
that
and
resonates
I mean,
so
girl,
much.
you better buckle up, because that's what's coming in the mastermind. But there's this like idea or perceived notion of like this space of like, when you'll get there, you hear all the time, I'll feel better, or I'll be able to do this and that or whatever. And it's constantly coming to you. And then once you are technically, like now I feel like, okay, like I'm there at that place I once always wanted to be. And now it's opened up like a whole other window of, well, what is next? How do we expand even more into this space? And I'm like, oh God, like here we go again. But I think that's the fun in it. And I think if you were to ask Andee too, who, she has a very successful online business, she's even in that space too of like, perceived from the outside world that I've made it, I'm here, but like, honey, I got big dreams and big goals, and like, there are things we're trying to build and impact we're trying to make. So I don't think it ever really goes away. It's just how you lean into it.
And I think at some point you learn that it's safe to have fun with it.
Yes.
As well. Like, because you can be, and I say this like from experience for me too, like you can be in almost that survival mode of like, yes, but I just have to get to somewhere. Like I just have to get to some point. Just let me get there. And then you do a couple of iterations of that. And then you're like, oh, okay, this could just be, I could play with this a little bit more now. Like, and maybe it's a sense of safety because you have reached a certain point. So like, your real world needs, like, money, like, and income and stability and everything are taken care of. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's something else, but you learn because you've almost like had enough goes around on it that you're like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing. Like, I don't know what we're doing, but I know what we're doing.
Right. I've been here
I
before.
I can have fun with
universe.
It. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think that the universe is always going to show you the same like lessons or stories or things. And it's how, I don't think you ever really evolve past it until like you learn what needs to be learned in that state. So, I mean, it's constant.
It is. Oh my God. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I love hearing stories like this, because to me, it feels like for the world, like for people to hear, there is like that creates a sense of ease in the journey, especially when things might feel tough as well. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing too. Where can people find you and follow you?
I love the Instagrams. So I'm over on Instagram at Kristin Kolterman, short and simple.
I'll include it in the notes as well. But
that's mostly where I hang out.
Yeah, I love it. And you've been doing is it weekly coffee chats that you've been doing? They're weekly?
Yes. So part of the facilitator program, again, an idea that I wanted to bring to life for over a year. I started these coffee talks with some of our fellow facilitators and women in our community. And it's been really, again, another like, let's lean in, and super powerful, really impactful for the women that are coming on and talking about their stories and their, areas of expertise. So it's a lot of conversation. And I love having that space and being able to talk in many different walks of life and background stories.
I love it. So if you want to get in proximity with all of that, you can go follow Kristin and you'll see all of those things. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing and for opening up and for taking us through your journey just a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, love. I appreciate it.